The fear of a migration influx is back on the European Union's agenda.
These refugees are at the Moria camp on Lesbos. Thousands continue to arrive on this overcrowded island every week.
There are no more borders to cross, smugglers to pay, or police to run from. This is the end of the line, a Turkish deportation centre.
The EU and the US want to better secure their borders, increasingly with the help of artificial intelligence and autonomous drones.
Camera monitoring is automated through a program that processes the images, recognizes what is approaching, and sounds the alarm.
In 2015, Greece was the epicenter of a crisis that looked impossible to survive. Imagine a bankrupt country, hospitals closing, police unpaid, and then, almost overnight, more than 850,000 refugees from Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan landed on its shores. On tiny islands like Lesbos and Chios, refugees outnumbered locals. Tourists once came for beaches and sunshine. Suddenly, those same islands were overflowing with tents, chaos, and desperation. Greece wasn't just unprepared. It was arguably the least capable country in Europe to face a migration emergency of this size. Yet somehow, it became the front line. Fast forward to December 2021, and Greece had pulled off what looked impossible. In just 12 months, the migrant population on its islands collapsed by 79%. Across the whole country, numbers dropped nearly in half. New arrivals? Down 58% on the islands and 41% nationwide. On the North Aegean Islands, the shift was unreal. Migrants went from nearly 1 in 12 residents to barely 1 in 70. For a country that had been drowning in chaos just a few years earlier, these statistics weren't just surprising, they were shocking. So how on earth did this happen? How did a country that was broke, overwhelmed, and sitting on thousands of porous islands suddenly flip the script? The answer will blow your mind. Greece quietly built one of the most extreme border systems on the planet. We're talking AI surveillance towers that can see 15 kilometers inside Turkey, a 200-kilometer steel wall, and the shutdown of 86 migrant camps in a single year. But there's a twist almost nobody talks about. A century-old migration story that completely rewrites how we understand Greece today. A historical parallel so powerful, it changes everything we thought we knew about how migration can reshape a nation. So today, on Across the Globe, we're diving deep into Greece's controversial blueprint for stopping migration. This isn't just about one country's border policy. This is about how Greece rewrote the rules of European migration control, and why what happened between 2019 and 2023 could change the future of Europe forever. Between 2015 and 2016, nearly 1 million asylum seekers poured into Greece as every other route into Europe slammed shut. On the island of Lesbos, the Moria camp, built for just 3,000 people, exploded to over 20,000 crammed inside. Families were squeezed into shipping containers. Children slept in mud. Disease ripped through overcrowded tents. It became the largest refugee camp in Europe and the most infamous. What made it even worse is this humanitarian disaster hit at the exact same time as Greece's debt meltdown, when the country was already bankrupt and barely able to fund hospitals or police. The images were devastating. Overcrowded dinghies tipping into the Aegean, beaches littered with life jackets and sometimes bodies. Islands once sold as Mediterranean paradises were suddenly ground zero for a humanitarian disaster, transformed almost overnight into refugee camps under the sun. For years, Brussels scolded Greece over the chaos, demanding better treatment for asylum seekers while refusing to take significant numbers themselves. Greece was left holding Europe's migration crisis alone. But everything changed in 2019. A new conservative government came to power with a blunt promise: fix the borders at any cost. Unlike Italy's constant policy swings, Greece put border control at the very top of its agenda. And this time, they actually had a plan.
A new defensive wall on Greece's border with Turkey, spanning some 40 kilometres. According to Greek authorities, it's impenetrable.
Long-range thermal cameras, radar, and potentially even swarms of drones. They're part of a high-tech border security system that Greece is testing to stop migrants arriving from Turkey illegally.
On the Evros River border with Turkey, Greece built a fence. A 5-meter high, approximately 200-kilometer steel wall wired with AI eyes. Surveillance towers line the frontier, packed with thermal cameras and radar that don't just watch the border. They can see, as we mentioned, 15 kilometers into Turkey. Let that sink in. Greece built a system that spies in real time on another country's territory 24 hours a day. And this isn't dumb tech either. The AI can tell the difference between a human, an animal, and even bad weather, and instantly alert guards the moment it senses a crossing. But the fence was just the beginning. Greece piloted something called the Reaction Project, an EU-funded system straight out of a dystopian movie. Picture AI-powered drones and self-driving vehicles patrolling the skies and back roads, intercepting what the algorithm labels as threats long before they ever reach the border. And it doesn't stop there. All of this tech is plugged into Eurosur, the EU's real-time surveillance grid, weaving together a digital web of sensors, drones, and cameras that can track movement across entire regions in seconds. The government also replaced those chaotic open camps with what they call Closed Control Access Centers, or CCACs. These aren't your typical refugee facilities. They're high-security centers enclosed by double razor wire fences and 24-hour camera surveillance. AI systems, once again, monitor residents and can automatically suppress protests or disturbances without human intervention. But maybe the most chilling tool isn't the drones or the fences. It's the tech you can't see. Greek border units now carry devices that can instantly detect a migrant's language and dialect, and then dig straight into their phones. In seconds, authorities can pull contacts, messages, and travel routes to identify people, and dismantle entire smuggling networks. It's a level of surveillance that feels less like border control and more like digital strip searching. What we're talking about here is a complete transformation from the chaotic, overwhelmed Greece of 2015 to what critics and news outlets started to refer to as a smart fortress by 2021. The European Union, which once criticized Greece's humanitarian failures, quietly funded this entire technological transformation with 1.6 billion euros in home affairs funding for 2021 to 2027. Most of it dedicated specifically to surveillance, fences, and returns rather than search and rescue operations. While the high-tech surveillance grabbed headlines, Greece simultaneously revolutionized its asylum processing system in ways that are arguably even more significant. Back in 2019, Greece's asylum system was drowning. More than 38,000 people, including almost 2,000 unaccompanied children, were crammed into facilities that couldn't handle it. Some asylum seekers were told they'd be waiting not months, but years, even decades for a decision. Then came the overhaul. Greece rolled out digital case files, faster interviews, and streamlined processing. By 2023, the backlog had been slashed nearly in half, and decisions that once took years were now delivered in just 3 to 6 months. Rejected applicants are now sent back fast under EU-Turkey deals and new bilateral agreements, while Athens quietly cut deals with countries like Bangladesh and Egypt to create legal seasonal worker channels. The tactic is brutally simple and effective. Two-track migration. Toughen the border to deter dangerous illegal crossings, and at the same time offer small, legitimate routes for people who actually want to work. Make illegal entry costly and pointless. Give legal entry a real path. The result? Fewer risky sea voyages, fewer smuggling profits, and a migration system that rewards paperwork over peril. By the end of 2021, Greece had shut down 86 migrant facilities, cutting its total capacity in half compared to the peak of the crisis. And nothing symbolized that shift more than the closure of the infamous Moria camp in 2020. Once the chaotic heart of Europe's refugee disaster, Moria's shutdown marked the government's pivot from overcrowded chaos to tightly controlled, high-security centers. It was the clearest sign yet that Greece wasn't just managing the crisis anymore, it was reshaping it. This brings us to the integration success story that simply doesn't get talked about enough. While Greece was busy building a digital fortress, it was also quietly running one of Europe's most successful integration programs. Through the EU-funded Helios scheme, more than 44,000 recognized refugees since 2019 have learned Greek, found jobs, and secured housing. The program even subsidizes rent for nearly 10,000 households, often paying landlords directly. It's a side of the story most people never hear. Razor wire on the border, but real support inside the country. Greece enrolled 12,230 migrant children in schools by mid-2023, When you consider that Greece's total under 18 refugee population is about 18,000, that means roughly 2/3 of migrant children are in classrooms rather than camps. But the numbers for unaccompanied minors are even more absurd. The population fell from 5,000 to 1,800, with EU-supported shelters providing about 2,000 places. Additionally, 1,367 unaccompanied children were relocated from Greece to France, Germany, and other EU states between April 2020 and March 2023. Without those transfers, thousands would have been stuck in camps for years. To ease the pressure, Greece doubled down on two strategies: moving people out and sending people back home. Through EU coordination between 2020 and 2023, more than 5,000 vulnerable asylum seekers were relocated to other member states. At the same time, Greece expanded its assisted voluntary return program, offering cash and reintegration training to encourage migrants to go back home. For some, it was a lifeline. For others, it raised a difficult question. Was this support or soft pressure to leave? Well, this isn't the first time Greece has faced a massive refugee crisis. And the last time they didn't just manage it, they turned it into an economic success story. A century earlier, Greece had already faced a refugee crisis on a scale that dwarfs today's numbers. After the Greco-Turkish War and the Lausanne Treaty of 1923, up to 1.5 million Greek Orthodox Christians were expelled from Turkey and forced into Greece, while more than 400,000 Muslims were pushed the other way. It was the largest forced population exchange in modern European history. Overnight, Greece's population jumped by nearly 20%. By the late 1920s, refugees made up almost half the population of Macedonia and a third of West Thrace. Cities like Athens and Thessaloniki doubled in size, while thousands of families were granted farmland to start over. The Greek government, supported by international organizations, established the Refugee Settlement Commission. They built houses, schools, and farmland for newcomers, granted them immediate citizenship, and within a single generation, the refugees' human capital investment began to lift the Greek economy. Recent research shows that descendants of those 1920s refugees demonstrate greater empathy toward modern asylum seekers. They were 8% more likely to support refugee aid after being reminded of their family's migration history. This century-old example proves that Greece once successfully integrated a massive refugee flow, a historical wildcard that rarely surfaces in modern migration debates. Could this historical memory be influencing Greece's current approach? The combination of strict border control with substantial integration investments for those who are allowed to stay mirrors the 1920 strategy: control the flow, but integrate those who remain. So let's talk about the results again quickly. In just a single year, the migrant population on the islands collapsed by 79%, and across the country it dropped nearly in half. Experts didn't see it coming. On the North Aegean Islands, the shift was even more surreal. Migrants went from nearly 1 in 12 residents to barely 1 in 70. That kind of sudden demographic freefall didn't just reduce numbers. It completely rewired the social fabric of islands that had been defined by camps and overcrowding for nearly a decade. Greece's asylum processing time improvement, from years to months, represents one of the fastest administrative transformations in EU history. New EU-funded projects are adding 12,000 places to the reception system, with significantly improved living conditions compared to the chaos of Moria. However, we can't overlook the significant obstacles that accompany Greece's success story. According to a Human Rights Watch investigation, Greek authorities allowed vigilante violence against asylum seekers in 2023 and engaged in violent pushbacks and abuses in prison. NGOs and journalists who reported on these violations were subjected to legal harassment and smear campaigns. Also, the surveillance system that monitors 15 kilometers inside Turkish territory raises fundamental questions about sovereignty and international law. Critics argue that Greece's high-tech border doesn't just stop illegal crossings, it blocks people before they even touch Greek soil. By detecting and turning back migrants in Turkish territory, Greece is accused of breaking international asylum laws that guarantee the right to claim protection once you arrive. In other words, the very system that slashed migration numbers may also be illegally slamming the door shut before anyone can even knock. The AI-controlled closed-control access centers have been likened to prisons by rights groups. These facilities use sensors and algorithms to spot abnormal behavior, like gatherings or shouting. When protests start, gates lock automatically, and authorities are alerted without human oversight. This AI doesn't just watch the border, it tries to predict the future. Drones are launched to intercept threats before they even reach Greek soil. To critics, that's not border security, that's pre-crime policing straight out of Minority Report, where algorithms decide who gets stopped before they've even acted. It's the ultimate question. Is this cutting-edge protection or automated injustice? There's also the fundamental question of displacement. Did Greece actually solve Europe's immigration crisis, or did they just move it somewhere else? Critics argue that stricter controls in Greece have simply pushed migration flows toward other routes, including more dangerous sea crossings that result in higher death rates. The central Mediterranean is the deadliest known migration route in the world, with tens of thousands of deaths and disappearances recorded by MMP since 2014. And according to ECRE, such maritime smuggling routes into Europe have seen an increasing number of fatal incidents. 3,800 people died in 2022, while traversing migrant and refugee routes from the Middle East and North Africa, 3,789 of whom died on sea-based routes in and around the region. At the end of the day, Greece did what it set out to do. Migration numbers collapsed, the camps emptied, and the borders held. By every metric, the mission worked. But here's the catch. Almost nobody believes this blueprint can be copy-pasted elsewhere. Geography, politics, and money all gave Greece unique advantages that other countries simply don't have, which raises the bigger question. Did Greece actually find a model for the world, or just a one-off miracle that can't be repeated? Simply put, Greece's approach isn't easily replicable across Europe for several critical reasons. Firstly, there's the geography. Greece's islands create natural bottlenecks that make surveillance and control much more manageable. Building a fence along a relatively short land border and controlling maritime choke points is fundamentally easier than policing Italy's huge coastline, or Spain's multiple migration routes. Political consensus is crucial as well. Greece achieved broad cross-party agreement on strict border control, something that's extremely rare in European politics. Conservatives, centrists, and many socialists all supported the approach, eliminating the policy reversals that plague migration strategies in other countries. Also, EU funding was essential. Without Brussels footing the €1.6 billion bill for border technology, Greece couldn't have built its digital wall. This level of EU investment in surveillance infrastructure isn't available to every member state. And there's the aspect of historical memory. Greece's experience with successful mass refugee integration in the 1920s may make the public more willing to accept tough, short-term policies paired with integration investments, a psychological foundation that doesn't exist elsewhere. Lastly, the legal context was unique. Greece invoked an emergency to temporarily suspend certain asylum rights in 2020. Other states might face much harsher EU legal challenges if they attempted similar suspensions without the same crisis context. Really, it's the technology that changes everything. And this is something that other countries would have to really try and replicate to get the same results. Greece's strategy is truly revolutionary, not only because of the surveillance technology, but also because of the way AI and automation have revolutionized the entire migration management system. When official documentation is not available, the dialect detection system may identify not just languages, but also particular regional dialects, assisting authorities in determining the true countries of origin of migrants. Extraction of phone data reveals intricate networks of travel itineraries, smuggling operations, and even family ties. The AI systems monitoring the closed controlled access centers don't just watch for escapes. They analyze behavior patterns, predict potential disturbances, and automatically adjust security protocols. We're talking about fully automated migration management with minimal human oversight. But perhaps most significantly, the integration of all these systems with Eurosur means Greece's border data is shared in real time across the entire European Union. When someone is detected by the Evros fence sensors, that information is immediately available to border authorities from Germany to Spain. This represents a fundamental shift from reactive to predictive migration management. Instead of responding to arrivals after they happen, the system attempts to prevent them before they happen. But make no mistake, the migration chaos of 2015 to 2019 was bleeding Greece dry. Emergency housing, medical care, endless security patrols, and slow-motion asylum processing were burning through billions. But here's the twist. Even though Greece's high-tech digital fortress looked expensive up front, it's actually saving money long-term. Faster asylum decisions mean fewer people stuck in costly camps. Automated surveillance means fewer guards on the payroll. And digital case files cut down on bloated bureaucracy. What was once a financial black hole is now oddly efficient. With the EU covering some 70 to 80% of costs for Greece's migration programs, Greece has been able to shift resources from emergency accommodation to more structured processing and integration systems. The new approach prioritizes faster processing times and more efficient case management compared to the chaotic system of 2015 to 2019. Ultimately, Greece's transformation raises fundamental questions about the future of European migration policy. If a bankrupt country dealing with the worst migration crisis in EU history can achieve such clear results, what does that mean for wealthier, more stable member states? Greece is building its reputation as the hotbed for Europe's border surveillance technologies. The technology it has developed is already being studied and adapted across Europe. The AI surveillance systems, automated processing procedures, and integration programs are becoming templates for EU-wide policy development. As reported by ECRE, experts argue that Greece's high-tech border approach represents the future of European migration management, with the country serving as a testing ground for digital surveillance technologies that could shape EU-wide policies. But whether Greece is laying out a blueprint or not, the human rights concerns likely aren't going away. The European Court of Human Rights continues to investigate pushback allegations. International organizations are documenting systematic violations of asylum law. The question becomes, can Europe accept Greece's results while ignoring the methods used to achieve them? There's also the broader geopolitical context. Greece's success depends heavily on cooperation with Turkey, but that relationship remains volatile. Changes in Turkish policy, regional conflicts, or EU-Turkey relations could quickly undermine the entire system. Essentially, whether this model represents the future of European migration policy or a dangerous precedent for the erosion of asylum rights may depend on your perspective. But one thing is for sure. Greece has fundamentally changed the conversation about what's possible in migration management. The question now is whether Europe will embrace Greece's blueprint, modify it to address human rights concerns, or reject it entirely in favor of more traditional approaches. What happens next could determine not just the future of European migration policy, but the fate of millions of people seeking safety and opportunity across the world's most dangerous borders. Success aside, the Greek experiment is still, believe it or not, far from over, and its results will only continue echoing across Europe for decades to come. What about how Italy solved the immigration crisis?